Good afternoon and welcome to Navigating the Transformation to an Enterprise Imaging World, a Health System CIO Media Inc. production sponsored by Hyland. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Health System CIO, and I will be your moderator today. We do have some interactive features we're looking forward to. One is our agree or over-the-top poll. We'll also be having questions or comments. You could submit them at any time in the Q&A panel in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Leave the default set to all panelists. And you can download the deck by using the URL on your screen. It's been sent out in the chat box, and it's at the bottom of our slides. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time, we're going to go about 35 to 40 minutes with our main panel discussion featuring Joe Marion, Principal with Healthcare Integration Strategies, Brandon Taggart, Managing Member and Principal Consultant with Confidi Healthcare IT Consulting, and Chris Magyar, Senior Product Manager, Enterprise Medical Imaging with Hyland. We've got some very serious imaging experts on the phone today to give you great information and answer your questions. So let's jump right into the discussion. Joe, let's start with you. You want to give me an overview of your organization and your role?
Sure. I am a healthcare industry consultant. Have been in the industry for 43 years and have been a consultant to healthcare providers for the past 20-plus years, primarily in imaging, radiology, cardiology, and more recently, enterprise-type imaging applications.
Very good. Joe, Brandon?
Hi. I've personally been in the imaging space for the better part of the last 20 years. I've been in the consulting space for the last 10. I've had a multitude of different roles that have kind of lend themselves to my ability to deal with both clinical and technical issues that imaging faces. My company, Confidi, is a full-service consulting firm based out of Sacramento, California. We provide specialty consulting specific to enterprise imaging, strategy assessment, vendor selection, as well as implementation.
Excellent. Chris?
Hi. I guess what am I? 30-year software engineer by training, 25 years in healthcare, 20 in enterprise imaging. I've worn a variety of hats, anywhere from R&D roles to service roles, marketing, sales consulting, and currently product management. My organization, Hyland, is basically services multiple industries, higher ed, insurance, financial, government, and predominantly healthcare. And within healthcare, we offer a combination of content services solution for dealing with clinical patient documentation as well as back office documentation, the workflows, application integrations, et cetera. And then on the enterprise imaging side, we have a complete portfolio of products, including a vendor-neutral archive, a universal diagnostic and clinical viewer, a workflow orchestration engine for diagnosticians, radiologists, and a capture and workflow solution for point-of-care imaging across all the other specialties.
All right, excellent. Let's get into the meat of it. Brandon, I want to start with you. Can you give me a high-level description of the main trends around enterprise imaging?
Sure. I think when we think of enterprise imaging, I think the most common thing that comes up is probably talking about VNAs and consolidation of disparate archives throughout enterprises. That also comes along with image enablement, the EHR, as well as strategies for getting to a consolidated enterprise viewer. However, I think one thing that I see in terms of a trend, or at least a best practice, is moving towards federation amongst the disparate archives. We see a lot of activity right now amongst organizations, whether they be mergers, acquisitions, or partnerships, that need to bring systems together in a very fast fashion. Typically, traditional data migration is not necessarily the way to go about that. So now we're moving more to the model of federation between those disparate archives to a single unified viewer.
Interesting. I think I have a feeling we're going to talk more about this idea of federation. But let me get your thoughts, Joe.
I think we're at sort of the tip of the iceberg scenario with enterprise imaging. I think that the challenge that providers face is the fact that imaging extends across many different service lines, and in the context of an overall perspective, areas that normally aren't considered part of, say, an enterprise imaging strategy, but certainly the whole question of artificial intelligence and work list orchestration and other aspects, clinical decision support, are going to be factors that have enterprise perspective as well and will impact how strategies are implemented.
All right, very good. Chris?
We're seeing a whole bunch of interesting trends here, one of which is enterprise imaging starting in specialties outside of radiology, point-of-care imaging specialties that kind of get the organization started, spreading into other specialties, and eventually bringing in cardiology and radiology, which is, I think, quite backwards from what we've seen in the past. A year ago, I would say that cloud, there was still a pretty strong resistance to cloud strategies. Now we are seeing a lot of interest in closing deals where cloud is a primary requirement of the deal. And this includes both cloud that we're hosting through Hyland, private cloud that our customers are enabling in, and now we're starting to see some public cloud opportunities manifesting as well. Legacy system replacement and multi-specialty imaging. People are looking to find imaging systems that can be replaced by a combination of enterprise imaging, universal specialty viewers, VNAs, and whatnot. So trying to reduce the number of imaging systems that they have in their institution. Reconstructed PACS, really bringing together PACS out of components, trying to drive the cost out and, again, get rid of all those redundant systems that we see in the enterprise. And I want to come back to that federation idea, because this is something that we've been doing a lot of. We kind of mix the two, multi-tenancy work with our VNA and viewer, but federating a viewer, for example, across many clinical systems, the VNA, XDS repositories, on-base document management systems, custom web interfaces on top of report repositories, really bringing that all together at the viewer level, but you can also do federation at the VNA level as well.
All right, very good. Thank you for that. Chris, we're going to start with you on here and sort of stick with you. Have you seen any specific movement in the last quarter? We talk about longer term trends, but maybe a shorter term or anything you see quickly changing. Are things evolving as you had expected over the past few months? And what about the speed at which things are moving? Any thoughts there?
Not to repeat myself, but probably the strongest thing in the last quarter has been cloud. I literally have had organizations that were stiff-arming us a year ago, and it's now a go, no-go point on whether we can support their cloud strategies, and the cloud strategies are all over the map. So, there's no one-size-fits-all solution that we're seeing. Another trend that we're kind of seeing in this thing is this reconstructed PACS, where organizations are really trying to, it's combinations of health systems and outsourced radiology reading groups that are looking for solutions that kind of meet their combined needs. And they're gluing together things like the VNA and workflow orchestration engines and diagnostic viewers and building these things out of sort of first-class components, which I'd say is kind of different than the deconstructed PACS where you're starting with a PACS and kind of taking piece factor out of VNA, factor out of viewer, or whatever. It's sort of a different strategy to it. And the speed, I'd say that probably the cloud speed is what is impressing me the most. It's not just people talking about it. It's people driving and making decisions on it that I think in the absence of that motivator they may not have made a decision in the time frame that we would expect.
All right. Very good. Joe?
I would tend to agree with what Chris is saying. I think the cloud is probably the prime area of activity today. I think that in addition to that, there is interest in the universal viewer concept as part of that, in the context that it's wonderful to store images, but you have to be able to access them as well. And I think the other aspect that is beginning to heat up more is the whole question of the workflow orchestration. And some of that is going to be driven next year in the context of at least radiology from the legislation that addresses clinical decision support. So I think there will be more activity in the context of how imaging fits into that, and that will ultimately have applicability across more than just radiology and the other service lines.
Very good, Brandon.
I agree with both Chris and Joe. I think they have a pretty good pulse on what's going on. Cloud has definitely come up a considerable amount, but there's also, I think there's a flip side. There's some organizations that are very cloud adverse. I think part of that is still concerns regarding performance. Maybe there's lack of education, as we all know, that cloud is a very nebulous term that it can mean many different things depending on who you're working with. So you have to be cognizant of that and be careful in your evaluation. In terms of evolving as expected, I guess everything kind of happens organically in this industry, but I would say that nothing really ever happens quickly. Unfortunately, it would be nice if we could move much faster within the enterprise imaging space.
I can pause on that cloud subject because I think that's a very interesting point. I'll make a brief point or two on that. What we're seeing on the resistance to the cloud thing is perhaps, I agree that there's that resistance, but there's also mechanisms for mitigating that resistance. And I think the two models that I would focus on for dealing with that, one is essentially having a primary instance of your enterprise imaging infrastructure on site in the primary data center, but as opposed to managing a secondary data center as part of the organization, putting that secondary out in the cloud. So even if you get disconnected, you still control all your data, you still have everything there, but in the event you have a disaster on site, you can fail over to the cloud instance of the solution in a business continuity type of manner for at least those components. The other one is where everything exists in the cloud. Let's say a primary, secondary VNA viewer, but there's an on-site point of presence, with maybe 6 months, 2 years of cache on it. So again, even if you have a catastrophic failure, you get disconnected from the cloud, you can survive on that on-site model. So really, I would consider both of those hybrid cloud models, and we're finding it a somewhat effective way to mitigate some of those concerns.
Good points.
All right. I wanted to see if they were going to argue with you, Chris. All right. So we're all getting along. Very good.
Please.
Okay. All right. I think this is a fun one, and let's see how it goes. Offer an interesting and, of course, anonymized customer story that illustrates a common challenge or best practice, someone you were working with and something they were dealing with that you think is sort of descriptive of larger trends that many may be struggling with. So, Joe, why don't you go first?
Sure. I think in a couple situations, both happen to be in the Northeast, where the project sort of got started in the context of radiology. I need a PACS replacement or whatever. And once you delve into it, you understand or you find out that not only is radiology storing radiology images, but they're also storing cardiology images. And then you find that through IT that there's some people interested in dermatology images and a better management of those. So it quickly progresses from being, say, strictly a service line sort of issue to one where, at least from the archival and display perspective, it's more of an enterprise scale solution. And I think that in both of those instances, to Chris's point, in the context of the reconstructed PACS, or some people have referred to it as the decomposition of PACS, it tends to be which elements do you need to focus on. So if you already have a well-established capability in the sense of advanced visualization, there's no necessity in the sense of absolutely replacing that particular piece. So in many of those instances, I think it tends to be zeroing in on those elements that cut across service lines and can better serve the environment from an enterprise perspective.
Very good, Brandon.
I'm going to probably deviate a little bit from this question because it says the word interesting. I'm probably going to tell you a boring story, but as to not out any of my clients, I'm going to tell something that's probably the most common challenge, and that is with regard to data migration. I don't think it can be understated the importance of not only choosing appropriate data migration vendor and having a solid contract language in terms of the deliverables associated with that agreement, but starting that as early as possible. In terms of data migration, that needs to be the initial part of the strategic roadmap and something that gets started immediately if consolidation is on the forefront.
All right, very good. Chris?
All right, so I picked an interesting one that I think is representative of one of the trends that we've seen. We had a customer who, or prospect at the time, had an Epic EMR. They had Hyland on-base that they were using for their content services or document management solution. They were using that solution for clinical documents about the patient, as well as some photo documentation of the patient, which is okay, but I would not consider that a best practice. So they were dealing with the end of work subset, which is a GI gastroenterology system that has gone end of life, and basically looking for a GI departmental image video capture solution to replace EndoWorks. So we kind of looked at this thing and said, okay, great. You know, we can sell you a GI video capture solution. They were thinking about putting those in their doc management solutions, but I wouldn't consider that really a great way to go. So we helped the customer understand the value of an enterprise imaging strategy. And they eventually decided to invest in a vendor-neutral archive, our PACS point of care image and video capture for GI, our no-read universal clinical viewer that can deal with viewing and even editing of videos, and then to integrate that with the Epic EMR, and in particular with Epic's Lumens gastroenterology reporting module. So basically the model there would be capturing images and videos, storing them into the DNA, notifying Epic of the existence of those, and then physicians could basically use the Lumens reporting system and either the Epic viewer or the no-read viewer to look at those studies, to put image thumbnails into the reports, and then to be able to basically access the images, reports, and the full videos through the no-read enterprise viewer. So I think it's interesting is that they started with gastroenterology, learned the value of an enterprise imaging strategy, and their plan is to move in the future into mobile capture, cardiology, and radiology after starting with this specialty.
Interesting, very interesting. All right, next question. We're going to go with Brandon first on this. The importance of governance when it comes to these enterprise projects, and as we had just, talked about imaging moving out of radiology and becoming an enterprise issue. So if radiology shouldn't lead it, should it be the CIO? And if so, what is radiology's role? And then the sub-question of political implications and challenges of sort of extracting that leadership of imaging from radiology and bringing it to an enterprise level. So, Brandon, your thoughts there?
In terms of importance of governance, it's critical. I think that's probably one of the number one mistakes of most organizations is that there isn't appropriate governance when leading an enterprise imaging initiative. A lot of times radiology is kind of tapped on the shoulder to kind of lead that endeavor, but that's not always fair because there's a multitude of different workflows that are much different than radiology that need to be taken into account and appreciated. And you can easily alienate your other specialty physicians if radiology is leading the charge. So there's a double-edged sword there, as radiology obviously is kind of cut their teeth in the technology environment in terms of our imaging technology currently available. In terms of leading, I don't know that a CIO would want to lead an endeavor like that. They should definitely be involved and very well aware, and also have that C-level backing behind any of the initiatives. But you want to definitely make sure that you have somebody well-versed in the imaging space leading that endeavor. That could be the CIO, but typically that's not always the case. And then radiology's role in that, especially since radiology is usually the first to go in terms of any new initiatives, definitely should be consultative in that initiative.
All right, very good, Chris.
All right. I think I'm going to share a link in the chat here for an article I thought was well done. It was a SIMJDI article on enterprise imaging governance, a white paper on this. If you're interested, please take the time to read that. I think we can't really underestimate the value of governance when it comes to these enterprise imaging projects. And I've seen a couple of strategies for dealing with it. A few points that I'd probably make on this. One is, as you look at the investment in shared infrastructure across multiple specialties and multiple facilities, really the question comes, how do they participate in that, right? Who's going to bear the cost of this thing? Who's going to participate in the decision-making processes for it? I found one organization that they created a rotating council, an enterprise imaging council, and the CIO had a seat, and the head of every department that had a current interest in investing in that space also had a seat. It's sort of a rotating group. So at different times, different departments have different levels of expertise, availability of champions, motivators. So the plan was to rotate people in and out of this council based on their kind of current level of interest and demand. And they also set up something where there were going to be no enterprise imaging infrastructure enterprise imaging expenditures, including devices, systems, you name it, that didn't go through that council. So basically, they had the final approval. So departments and whatnot could buy whatever they want, but if they wanted enterprise-level investment from the organization's budget, they were going to have to go through the council to get it. And the last one was kind of the side effect of this, which was it was a deliberate strategy of attrition for systems that were not interoperable with that organization's enterprise imaging strategy. So basically, you could continue to run maintenance on your old systems that didn't integrate well, but if you wanted to replace and refresh them, the council would look at your proposed solution, determine whether it integrated well as part of the enterprise imaging strategy or not, and if it did not integrate appropriately, you weren't going to get funding. So they weren't getting rid of anything per se, but they weren't letting anybody refresh anything that wouldn't fit into the overall larger strategy. I thought it was an interesting way of tackling the problem.
Very interesting, very interesting. Joe?
I think it's sort of a dichotomy in the sense that individual service lines obviously have their own perspective to things and their own needs relative to storage and display capabilities. I think that beyond that, part of the issue is that it also is a function of demand or want or drivers. So if you don't have a driver, there isn't much point in having governance or any kind of committee to drive it. The basis of a broad governance body, I think, is a function of the fact that there are a lot of different requirements outside of radiology that radiology could care less about. So in the context of different image formats and whatever, they may become more significant and bigger drivers. And I think to the point Chris was making in the context of other areas that might be popping up that demand or need an enterprise perspective, that's why I think the broad basis of a multidisciplinary group is necessary. The glue that sort of hangs that all together, or where it all comes back on their shoulders, obviously is IT. So IT really needs to be an integral part of that and act potentially as maybe an arbiter if the requirements tend to vary from one place to another.
I think there's an interesting tension within the IT and the radiology, right? I mean, IT obviously understands enterprise infrastructure best, but they tend to not understand or value tools and workflows very well. Radiology's got the best background in imaging informatics and has got the best infrastructure, dealing with everything from ordering systems to RISs and modalities and PACS and reporting systems and viewers. They've been doing this for longer, and you're probably most likely to come up with a savvy champion from radiology. But the question becomes, how many of those individuals are interested in trying to address the imaging needs of the organization as a whole, as opposed to focusing on the needs of radiology, right? So it's kind of a double-edged sword. You love to have that talent from radiology, but you run the risk of them being radiology-centric, and then some of the other service lines don't like. They're concerned that radiology won't take care of their needs, right? There's a certain fear factor associated with giving up too much control in that space.
Brandon or Joe, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think Chris is exactly right. I mean, dare I say, it's a rare bird to find an individual or individuals that are capable of working in a multi-specialty space, especially within imaging informatics. I think that's one of the key kind of stumbling blocks of our industry and multiple organizations, is that we feel the need to continually segment because there isn't the clinical know-how that goes across the service lines. So it's definitely a real problem, and I can be honest with you, other than, this is not a plug, but other than consultants, I don't know where to find individuals that have that multitude of experiences. It's very hard to find in most organizations.
Yeah, I think the bigger,
Joe, anything you want to? Chris, go ahead. Go ahead, Chris.
Just in terms of where you find them, like the larger institutions, the academic medical centers, the research-oriented, the more cutting-edge ones, you're likely to find those thought leaders that are trying to put their thumb on the scales of how this thing goes. But when you move into more operationally centric organizations, I think I would agree they are hard to come by.
Joe, I know you got something else to say there.
Sure, I would agree. I think that the other dilemma is in the context of the differing requirements for images. So radiology has maybe radiology and cardiology are somewhat unique in the context that they are evaluating images and providing an opinion, whereas once you move outside of those service lines and you get into areas such as dermatology or wound care or whatever, they're in a treatment mode, and their need or access and use of images may tend to be more internalized than what a radiology or cardiology does. So I think that that's an aspect that has to be taken into account as you plan or configure different systems.
All right, very good. I want to get to a few audience questions right now. So the first question is, when will we begin to see the expanded use of XDS and XDSI? Chris, let me start with you.
Well, we're seeing it today in other countries that have mandated it. We give a excellent visibility into this because we offer a full XDS stack in here, everything from patient identity managers to registries, repositories, imaging sources, consumers, gateways, and all the interfaces in there. In the U.S., I think it's kind of interesting. We're seeing organizations like Epic leveraging XDS internally in their exchange mechanisms. And we're also seeing organizations in the U.S. that want to store the images that are acquired by native devices. They want to store them natively without necessarily creating a DICOM encapsulation or wrapper for them, requiring a DICOM viewer. So the kind of the overhead associated with dropping a document into an XDS infrastructure is pretty light relative to DICOM in some ways. And this may be a peculiarity of our solution. Since we have a full DICOM and XDS stack, we have people choosing to put all of those documents into the XDS repository, which then lets you use a registry that federates across multiple repositories, have a viewer that sees across DICOM and XDS, and delivers kind of an effective solution. So I think it's a slow specialty trend in the U.S., but a viable option. It's absolutely a necessity in EMEA and Canada. And we're seeing a lot of depth going on with things like XDR and basic patient privacy consent mechanisms and things dealing with sensitive documents, like all the richer workflows that I think XDS really didn't support to begin with. We're seeing increasingly savvy organizations specifying those things out in excruciating detail. And if you can't basically meet their needs, they're not buying from you.
Very good. Joe or Brandon, any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with Chris in the context that I use one example of a Canadian situation where the provincial, the province had a PACS system of their own, and yet in the contracted services, which most of their outpatient procedures are done through contracted services, they had a different system. And the dilemma is that the provincial administration wanted to bring all of those images into their system and charge those individual people the cost of that. And it was suggested to them that by going with something like XDS and the notion of a repository, they could, and a registry, they could have multiple repositories in a common registry, and that was an approach that perhaps would alleviate the need to bring everything into the provincial system, but still provide that accessibility they were looking for.
Brandon, any thoughts?
I think Joe and Chris bring up very good points. One of the things, and maybe not mentioned that I noticed about XDS, is there's a lot of acquirement of XDS environment. Registries are being populated, but they're not always being utilized as they were originally procured. And I think that was kind of touched on a little bit. But the other problem is there's kind of an understanding with XDS, especially XDSI, that other organizations would acquire it as well, because it's, in terms of an exchange environment, you would expect the other organization to have XDSI as well. And that's not always the case, because most of the exchange that we see occurring, whether it is to larger IDNs, which sometimes occurs, it's usually a bunch of smaller clinics or outpatient imaging centers, and they don't necessarily have those capabilities. So there's still some issues that we need to work out to be a little more efficient with our image exchange environments.
All right, very good. Next audience question. With the ability to federate across unaffiliated systems, do any of you see a time when radiological professional services will be offered as a rules-based open marketplace? Joe?
Wow.
Yeah.
I guess I'm
You're
maybe
stunned.
eventually,
You're speechless.
I think that. Well, I think that eventually we may see some of that. The difficulty is in the context that there is so much consolidation going on. It may not be necessarily across systems, but systems trying to consolidate just within themselves. My healthcare provider in southeast Wisconsin is going through that right now in the context of having merged with a large provider from northern Illinois. So I think we will see more of that. I think that the need for professional services is going to increase to address that because there will be more and more need to federate that information.
Brandon, thoughts?
Can you restate that question? I wasn't expecting that one.
I can. No, that's an audience question. This is our very bright audience.
It's in the Q&A section.
Fantastic.
If you open up the Q&A section, you can read it.
That's right. But I'll read it for you anyway, Brandon. With the ability to federate across unaffiliated systems, do any of you see a time when radiological professional services will be offered as a rules-based open marketplace?
Yeah. So now that makes context for what Joe stated. I think that's probably a long time coming. I would imagine there's going to be some political push before the point at which we get to something of that nature. I think we're going to continue to have kind of a same system as we have currently, but that is definitely an interesting thought.
All right, very good. Chris?
I think there's a lot of technical and competitive and whatnot challenges before we'll be able to go to that place. What I am seeing is richer sets of outsourced reading groups reaching out across organizations, competing with each other within an organization. I'm seeing larger organizations that are geographically distributed, set up sort of centralized and remote reading services. So like off-hours reading all going to a centralized place, or the local guys handling what they can do, but they're maybe not expanding new hires in that particular area. There's stuff happening kind of like within organizations and across reading groups, but I think the idea of having it like an open marketplace where different legal entities competing with each other for reads, no time in the near future, but it's an interesting idea.
All right, very good. We are going to go with our fun agree or over-the-top poll. So you should see that poll open now, and let's go ahead and answer those three questions now. The concept here, agree or over the top. These are extreme statements and want to see what you think of them. So enterprise imaging is nowhere near as top of mind with CIOs as it should be. Do you agree with that, or you think that's over the top? The main EMRs are far from optimally configured to present images in the normal clinician workflow. Do you agree with that, or is that over the top? And all health systems must eventually move to an enterprise imaging approach. So go ahead and answer that, and then I'm going to have each one of our panelists give their opinion of each point. So Brandon, take the first one. Now you have to take a stand first. So do you agree with that, or is it over the top? And then you can feel free to qualify your answer.
I would say it over the top.
Okay.
Can I
More
clarify
thoughts?
now?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I would say that would be maybe a fair statement in the past. Maybe in the past 5 years, I've noticed a clear change as of late with regard to CIOs and their awareness of the importance of enterprise imaging. So I think the cat's out of the bag. I think providers have been very clear with their CIOs in terms of the expectations, and they're starting to move in the right direction to address it.
All right, very good. Next point, we're going to put this one to Joe. The main EMRs are far from optimally configured to present images in the normal clinician workflow. What do you say, Joe?
I think it could be perceived as a trick question.
You got to pick, buddy.
EMR, I would disagree in the context that the EMR is optimally configured. But if you consider the fact that most EMRs can be image-enabled, then I would have to agree with the statement that they can be configured to do so. It's just a question of actually doing it. And just to comment back on the first one again about enterprise imaging, I'm not so sure it's over the top as much as it is the question of what's the driver. So it's not at the CIO's top of their list right now, because what's the purpose in doing it? I think that that's still the primary issue here is that facilities have to come to grips with what's driving the need for a true enterprise imaging environment.
Now that leaves you, Chris, for the last one. All health systems must eventually move to an enterprise imaging approach. Do you agree with that, or is that over the top?
I think I'm going with Joe's trick question, but I'll
come on, you guys are unbelievable.
I agree. I agree that over time they will, but
okay.
I'll qualify that some. In the short term, for especially for smaller organizations, I'd say it's over the top. They just can't deal with it. They have too many challenges. They're trying to maintain their independence. They got budgetary challenges, et cetera. Longer term, looking at enterprise imaging, and I'm going to go broad here and say not just medical imaging, but document imaging, clinical images about the patient, and dealing with the entire span of unstructured content, medical imaging or not. The notion of leaving all these service lines out to fend for themselves with no imaging infrastructure support is going to be implausible over time. Right? I think it's just going to be an expectation that the organization provides that infrastructure, provides some way of supporting the scheduled workflows, the encounter-based workflows, deals with image identification, storage, universal viewing. Just like today, you would not think of running a radiology operation without a PACS. I think that, in your words, eventually enterprise imaging is just going to be just as common as a PACS is today.
All right, very good. Well, we're going to share our poll results, so you should see those now. Point number one, enterprise imaging is nowhere near as top of mind as it should be with the CIOs. 67% agree with that statement. The main EMRs are far from optimally configured for image workflow. 78% agree with that. And all health systems must eventually move to an enterprise imaging approach. 67% agree with that. Very good. All right, now one of my favorite parts, ask a co-panelist. Chris, I'm going to let you ask your co-panelist a question first.
All right. I'm gonna ask Brandon here because I get to spend a little bit more time with Joe. How do you see the evolution of enterprise imaging acceptance over time, kind of looking past, present, future, and how do you see kind of right along with that the evolution of the sophistication of enterprise imaging implementations in the field?
Oh, good question. Okay. So from a past perspective, I think all three of us have lived this. It started out very simple, and the idea and the concept of the VNA, which seems new to some, but it's been around for over a decade, even more than that.
I was right in the first one 2 decades ago.
yeah. I mean, really, it's been a long time coming. So the VNA, which I say it on a regular basis, that's a horrible acronym to describe a system that does so much more. But the VNA was kind of the starting point for that, of having a centralized archive. That was the understanding. It was sold with the thought process that you would never have to do a data migration again, which is a complete fallacy, but sounded good. And then consolidating, having a single repository for all of your clinical data. Then stacking on top of that your PACS solution or multitude of PACS solutions. Then we got more into the consolidation model, still really focused on the radiology specialty. Again, radiology is always kind of the first to cut their teeth on these sorts of things in terms of technology. And then we started to see the movement towards cardiovascular systems, and those being stacked on top of the VNA as well. And then right around the same time, a heavy influence in terms of image enablement, that tied in with the EHR. I think we still, strangely enough, struggle with some of these things that at this point seem so very basic. But again, we have to walk before we can run. So there's a lot of things that still need to be done out there in the enterprise. Some organizations are doing this incredibly well, way beyond this. And now we are at that point, we got to the point of deconstructed PACS, where we started to segment all of the components, the workflow, or now we use the term orchestrator components from the PACS, where we segmented out the viewer and tied that to string directly from the VNA. It allowed us a level of flexibility that I think is still very useful today. And now we're seeing this kind of reconsolidation of PACS coming back together, or even a single centralized platform with the workflow component being tied into the VNAs or being tied into the PACS solution again, or having a multitude of different solutions so that you can have adaptability given the organization's specific needs. I'm interested to see what's going to happen next, but what I'm gathering is right now it's a consolidation for simplicity to a single database, but there's still a lot of use cases for what we talked about earlier in terms of federation. So I know this sounds all over the place, but I think the industry as a whole is still very much in many different places. I mean, we can see trends, but it's really a solution specific to the organization and their particular needs. I still stand by that to this day.
Joe, you want to jump in? Any thoughts?
Sure. On that topic, or you want me to ask a new question?
Yeah. No. Well, whatever you prefer. I'll give you opportunity to either comment on that question or if you want to ask something.
Well, a question to Chris. I know we've probably talked about this, but in essence, the question relates to the convergence of document and imaging, and I'll relay in a prime example of that. I worked with a facility out on the West Coast where they were wrestling with implementing a new EHR in the context of Epic, and in the orthopedic area, they would routinely take pictures of orthoscopic exams and put those in the patient folder. And it was fun watching them when they realized that the patient folder, the old mechanical folder, was going away. And the question was, how were they going to preserve all of what they had previously captured, as well as how were they going to do that in the future in an electronic environment? So I'm just sort of curious as to how Chris feels about that.
This is an interesting puzzle that we see quite often. Hyland has no less than 3 different doc management systems in its portfolio, with on-base perceptive content that was required, and McKesson One content also acquired. So we see people using a variety of proprietary repositories for medical images outside the standard DICOM PACS VNA space. They put things in their doc management systems, and they come sort of, how does the world of content services from a document management-centric perspective handle running into enterprise imaging kind of colliding together? So what we found is there's no one right size fits all for people, but we do have some general guidance. Images about the patient, clinical documentation, surgery notes, consults, ID records. There's just countless the examples of documents about the patient really seem to fit best inside the document management or content services system. Images of the patient tend to go best in a VNA, although you can debate whether they should go into DICOM or XDS, one or the other, or in some cases both. The real question here becomes, what's the clinician experience look like? And I think at the end of the day, we want a single pane of glass. If the clinician is living inside the EMR and seeing the primarily discrete data that EMRs handle, and they can get to all the unstructured content, those documents about the patient, and they can get to the images of the patient with the appropriate tools for viewing those images, whether you're a generalist, a specialist, a radiologist, with whatever tool set is appropriate for you. If you can get to all of that data at the same time from a single pane of glass somewhat seamlessly, you solve the problem. Depending on where you're coming from and how aggressively you want to get there, there's a variety of strategies for making that happen. But I think that the end goal is pretty much the same regardless.
All right, very good. Well, that's about all we had time for today. What a great discussion. Like I said, you're not going to get more imaging expertise in one place a lot of the time. That was well done. Regarding continuing education, those of you who hold the CHIME CHCIO certification get 1 CEU for attending our events. If you've asked us to let CHIME know you were here, we certainly will. Otherwise, make sure you let them know. If you need a certificate of attendance for another CEU program, you can use the final slide in this deck. You'll receive an email when the on-demand recording of this event is ready and posted. If you'd like to sponsor one of our upcoming events or book a custom event, you could reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team, and you can go to our site to register for upcoming webinars. With that, I want to thank our panel, Joe Marion, Brandon Taggart, and Chris Magyar. And I want to thank Hyland very much for sponsoring this event. I want to thank you, of course, our attendees, for continuing to come to our events. And with that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks, everyone.